because I do want just one thing here, Shannon, I think we should focus on, because you mentioned as a solution funding these folks and getting more teacher dollars. And I think anybody listening right now, the audience says, yeah, teachers need to be able to be empowered. But you said we need to punish the politicians that they create the scenarios that we can't fix this stuff. Well, I want to just quickly show you something. And this is something that blew my mind. Ready? When you look at now 2024, here's the data for 2024, but we're only in June, so it's not 100% yet. Let's look at 2022 and 2020 here. So just for folks playing along the home game who aren't watching the video version, let's look at this. So in 2022, $55.3 million were given in contributions to political parties by the teacher unions. In 2020, something big happened in 2020. What was that? Oh yeah, COVID. Something else happened. $66.5 million was given in donations and contributions to politicians. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's look at where that money actually went. Percentage to Democrats, 99.47% went to the Democratic Party in 2022 and 97.2% in 2020 to the Democratic Party. Republicans in 2020, 2.19%, and in 2022, 0.38. They couldn't even get a whole percent. So I look at that, and again, I'm not super good at math, but I was good at statistics. That speaks volumes, and it's not an outlier, because if you scroll down, let's go all the way down to 1990. Just here's the contributions for folks, again, from the Democratic Party, or rather to the Democratic Party from teachers unions. 94%, 96%, 98%, 97%, 96%, 94%. You're going to see a recurring theme. It's all 90+%.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our friends over at AMP America, folks. Get the news you need to know without the corporate media bias or fluff. Head to ampamerica.com for news articles, opinion pieces, podcasts, and more. Also, the Brian Nichols Show is powered by our phenomenal studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle. Now, folks, you've been listening to the show for a while. You know that Cardio Miracle is, in fact, the best heart health supplement in the world. And if you want to learn how Cardio Miracle can help lower your blood pressure, lower your resting heart rate, help improve those restless nights of sleep, plus give you more of a pump at the gym, stick around. We're going to go ahead and talk more about Cardio Miracle later in the episode. But first, we're going to talk about a recurring topic here on the show in more recent months, and that is the education system, the schooling system. Let's talk all things in that world. But specifically today, we're going to go ahead and laser focus on teachers. How can we help teachers? And to join that today is Shannon Hazel. She's joining us talking about her brand new book, New Teacher Confidential. Shannon, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining the show. Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into our conversation today. And I know we have a lot to unpack when it comes to the educational system, teachers, all that they spend in terms of time, energy, and of course, money into helping their kids learn and have a fruitful education. But before we go into today's topic, do the audience a favor, Shannon. Introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience. And why do you find yourself in this world of focusing on education, particularly through helping empowering teachers?
Yeah. So, Brian, I was an educator. I was a teacher for 25 years. And I recently retired in June. And I knew that my first order of business was to write a book for new teachers. There's so many things that teachers coming into this career path just don't expect, weren't aware of, and quite frankly, get caught off guard by, and it becomes very overwhelming. So I thought, you know what, before I get too far removed from the education system, I'm going to write a book and hopefully try to help some new teachers set them up for success.
I love it. I love it. Well, and let's dig into today's topic, right? And that is really, it is around teachers. So let's set the stage here. We're in 2024. We've had the Department of Education here in the state since the 70s. And by the way, elephant in the room, we've seen when the Department of Education, this golden beacon on a hill comes into existence, education standards should just skyrocket, right? Nope, opposite. So something's happening, right? And I know we talked before we hit the record button. You said maybe we should start funding teachers more, but I'm looking at the funding right now. It's not the teachers who are getting that money. It's the administrators that are getting the money. So it looks like the dollars are there, Shannon, but they're just not going to the right folks. Now, we have a bias here in the show, and I'm going to say maybe that's inherently due to institutional incentive structures that are built in our education schooling system here in America. But let's talk about, how we can at least look at that system right now and maybe get some Band-Aids. I don't know. Talk to us about this problem we see, and what are some of the solutions you're workshopping here?
Yeah, so Band-Aids is a good word for this, because we often Band-Aid solutions in education. But as anyone in education will tell you, it all starts with funding. So we have to fund our schools efficiently, and quite frankly, just need to spend more on them if we're going to deliver the education system that we're saying we're delivering. So those monies have to make it to the front line. They have to make it to teachers, to students, and our classrooms need to be equipped with things that teachers and students need to create a productive learning environment so that all students can learn at a high level and get the supports that they need.
So let's dig into that, because I've had our good buddy Corey DeAngelis here in the show a couple times, and he has the idea of fund students, not systems. And it breaks my heart to see some educators who they want nothing but the best for their kids. They want to see the kids that come through the school have successful educational careers that will propel them to a successful real life adventure. And yet we see a lot of the money just not going to the right places. So Corey recommends the idea of having the money follow the students, and then in the marketplace, being able to help empower teachers to not be isolated by your zip code of where your school district offers different services, but rather let the teachers go where the money is, to your point, right? And with that, allow the money to follow the educational institutions and the teachers that are actually helping get the good results for those kids. So talk to me about your perspective on that.
Wow, that's a lot. So that's different than the education system that I'm used to, but it's quite, an intriguing idea.
And by the way, what's the system that you're more familiar with?
So I'm in Canada, and so our funding is a little bit different. And I'm not super familiar with the funding system in the United States. However, we fund per student. However, as we all know, depending on your zip code and the area that you live in, some schools are able to fundraise or find creative ways to raise more money for their schools than others. And so there really is this, have and have not happening in Canadian schools, where depending on, and I'm sure it's similar in the US, depending on where you're located, can also dictate how much your school has for funds. So I think that we just need to look at increasing the funding. Yes, let's do it per pupil, sure, but there's just not enough. We need to increase the amount that we're allocating per student so that our classrooms are equipped with the basic things they need. I often use the analogy that we wouldn't expect surgeons going into an operating room to have to bring their own equipment in order to operate on patients, yet we expect teachers to have to bring all of their own equipment in order to educate students. And again, depending on, that financial barrier that teachers may face, not all teachers may be able to fund their own classrooms. So we really need to find a way to not just Band-Aid this financial crisis in education, but find an actual permanent solution.
No, I agree. And here, actually, as you're finishing up here, I'm going to share this screen. This is specifically outlining Chicago school spending. And this, I think, paints the picture that we need to talk about, right? So Chicago schools has had an increase from fiscal years 2012 to 2024 of 97% in spending, which I think addresses the first part of what you raised up here. But then you look at the outcomes, right? We see, and for the audio listener who's not seeing what we're seeing on screen here, the reading and math rates have precipitously declined to negative 63% and negative 78% respectively. So what does that mean? Spending's up 97% since 2012. Grades are down 60 to 80%. Now, listen, I am the product of a public education, but I'm looking at those numbers, Shannon. Something's not adding up. And I know math was my weakest subject. However, even I can look at that and say something's not mapping out here. Now, I got to find the other graph I wanted to show here, but there's another graph that breaks down the spending where it allocates the money towards students, towards teachers, and then you see the graph towards administrators. And this is where I think we can really laser focus some solutions today, right? You look at the administrators and the administrative state, and just looking at the schooling situation we're talking about here today as the example, it's gone up just exponentially. And the increase for students and teachers, it's at this very steady low increase. So something's not mapping out with the teachers and the students getting their, let's use the favorite term, fair share, versus where this money is now going towards administrators. Now, I'm not going to open up the door into a lot of other topics of where, the administrators are spending their time, like a lot of these sometimes silly initiatives that are more focused on making people feel good than actually helping educate our kids. So talk to me about where maybe we could start finding some solutions, getting the money out of the administration and more towards the people who actually need it, the teachers and the kids.
Yeah, I think when you put up that graph, it like shocks people, right? If they just look at it, but you have to understand where is that money going? And like you're alluding to, it's not going to teachers and students. So one would think you increase the funding, you're going to increase results, which is only true if you're allocating that money into the right places, right? So we need to look at a solution where that money is going directly to teaching and learning, to teachers and students. And quite frankly, our parents need to hold the decision makers accountable and say, okay, we know that there should be a correlation here and there's not. Why not? Why does that graph look like that? Why are you increasing funding, but our student outcomes aren't increasing? And that needs to be, at the forefront of the parent conversation. They need to be with the decision makers, expecting more, that these funds go where they're needed and where they belong. Because at the end of the day, the parents and the students are our customers and they're the ones we need to answer to. So they have every right to be asking those questions.
By the way, I love that you use that word. They are the customers, because you're spot on. They are the customers. And that is exactly why. And going back to maybe where this is just a cultural thing, being from Canada. And then, by the way, we talked about beforehand, I am Canada light, so I can empathize with my Canadian friends, because I grew up in the northern New York border right there in Canada. We used to go to Canada all the time. Best Chinese food is a place called the New Yorker right across the border in Canada. So go there's your bingo card that you never thought you'd be filling out today. But again, going back to the ideas that I've embraced here in the show. And this is something, again, Corey DeAngelis has been really promoting here in the States. And this might be a new way of thinking about funding education, Shannon. I want to hear your thoughts about this. And this is the idea of school choice. And I'm not sure how super familiar you are, but just the basics for maybe you and the folks who aren't familiar with school choice. The idea that instead of the traditional way of funding schools, where zip code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they have their folks that live in that community. And if you grew up in that community, you could only go to the public school where your zip code permitted. Whereas the school choice model is saying, hey, let's take this funding directly away from going right to that zip code and rather let it go to the parents, because to your point, they are the customers here. Let them now take a step back and say, where can I send my kid to get the best education? Not the best schooling, but the best education. And with that, I want to make sure that the dollars are being used efficiently and effectively. So much like we were just talking about, it now empowers the parents to say, okay, this school over here, their district is getting their administrators paid like crazy, crazy dollars, but their teachers and the students, that money's not going to them. Whereas over here, I have a different school district I can send my kid to now. And with that, the funding following that student, because the administrators say, hey, we're going to take a base salary and it's not going to increase over 10 years, let's say. But the money we're going to have going in that's extra, we're going to have that go directly towards the kids and the teachers and empowering them and improving their conditions in the classroom and giving them more opportunities to go outside of the classroom to get that real life experience. So,
hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show. Across the board, it's not so much a matter of how do we get Mr. or Mrs. Bureaucrat, in our case, DC, in your case, in Ottawa, how do we get them to hear us and see this complaint and change these huge, massive funding mechanisms? Well, that's why we're just saying, hey, just change the way that the dollars are being allocated. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying we're going to send it directly to that school, we're going to send it to the parents, and we're going to let the parents decide. Because, as you said, parents and kids are customers, and they know best. Just like if I were to say, hey, Shannon, where do you want to go shopping tonight? You want to go to Walmart or Target, right? You have a choice. But if you were to say, hey, Shannon, we're going to go to Walmart tonight because we can only go to Walmart because that's the literally only store we're allowed to go to. Not the only store we can go to, the only store we're allowed to go to. I mean, that might change the way that Walmart builds in their pricing structures or the way that Walmart invests their money. Maybe they're not going to go after the lower prices, live better Walmart, but rather maybe they're going to be like, hey, they can't choose somewhere else. So maybe we can start giving everybody bonuses like crazy just because. So that's kind of a Spark Notes version of school choice. Now, if that's new to you, Shannon, I want to hear your feedback. And if it's not new and you're like, I'm not so sure, give me that feedback as well.
Yeah, I might be on the, I'm not so sure side. In theory, I love it. It sounds great. And choice is important. In realities, I feel like being on the inside of education, it's a little bit of a logistical nightmare. What we coin here as school shopping, school hopping, I should say, where, parents, students, somebody gets upset about a little thing and that's it. I'm pulling my kid out of your school and I'm going to this school. And then 3 months later, they're upset about something else and that's it. I'm leaving this school and I'm going to this school. So logistically, we could see a lot of transiency in schools where parents and kids are school hopping, constantly trying to find the right fit. I also think that
really quick, by the way, is that a bad thing though?
Yes, because there's going to be gaps in kids' learning when they keep switching schools and then a new teacher has to get to know them again and learn their academic abilities and their personalities and their strengths and needs. That takes time. And then if curriculum was covered here already and they go here, do you know what I mean? There could be gaps in curriculum. So I do see that as possibly a detriment to students, more so, your average or maybe struggling student, not your students where academics seems to come easy to them. But typically, the students we would see maybe hopping around would be ones that are more struggling and parents are thinking there's got to be something better. And in trying to find that something better, it could actually be to their detriment because nobody gets to know their child really well to dig in and know exactly how to help them. And I also think it's letting, our politicians and our governments out easy. We're not saying, hey, the standard in every school has to be high. We're saying, we're going to pick and choose and go to the ones that are high. And then what about the kids and the parents who maybe have other barriers, like their work life doesn't allow for them to get their kid to another school. They don't have the transportation or access. It's going to open up some other barriers that hopefully people who are proposing this have considered. But while I agree with the spirit of it, from being a teacher on the inside, I can see some logistical things that may not play out as anticipated.
Well, and I agree. Like, we can't, and maybe this is a philosophical thing from my perspective, is that, well, we can't control everything. And by design, we've seen that the more, and I'm going to use the Star Wars analogy. I know you guys all love the Star Wars analogy, but like it's Princess Leia talking to Grand Moff Tarkin, and she's like, the tighter you grip your fingers together, the more star systems will slip through, right? Like, or something like that. But like, that is in essence what at least I've seen, right? Is that the more, and just look at the American system here, for example, 1970s, the Department of Education comes into play, and they say, hey, we're going to do just that. We're going to set these standards for these state school or these state jurisdictions. And therein, obviously, your school district is your school district, but it follows certain state standards, and the states are now going to follow certain federal standards. And you would think that because of that standard now being set in place, that we should see a direct result of increased test scores, increased funding directly to the teachers. But this is the part that I get nervous about, Shannon, is that I hear that and it sounds great, but then I see the results and I get a little queasy, because, and here I'm going to show this on the screen right now. Here's the graph I was looking for. An 88% increase since 2000 in the funding towards administrative staffs versus 37% increase for principals and assistant principals. And what's that at the very bottom? Oh, it's so hard to see. That's right. It's the percent increase towards funding for students and for teachers. 8%. So an 80% discrepancy. And that's telling me, Shannon, that something in the incentive structures in the back end aren't working. So from an economic standpoint, I take a step back and I say, okay, well, we know supply and demand, and yet we're seeing where we should be having more supply, and there's obviously going to be a continued demand, that should help dictate a natural price. And yet I know we don't need this many administrators or the funding to follow this number of administrators versus where it should be going. So let me ask you this. How do we, when you talk about like the bureaucrats and the politicians, how do we get them to fix, I guess I'm going to use that term, how do we fix that when it seems like this is a direct outcome of their attempt to fix it?
We got to show them the data. The data says it's not working, number one. And number two, I feel like we have to improve, the perception of public teachers, public school teachers. Like, we're often the target instead of being supported, right? Just like teachers need to support students, the public needs to support their teachers and demand that they're paid fairly and that they're treated with respect and that they're treated as professionals, so that more people want to be in the profession, stay in the profession, because we know when teachers are constantly turning over, that there's a learning curve there, and it takes a while to hit your groove and become, the professional teacher and have the skills and the knowledge to help students. So if we're constantly seeing those teachers leave the profession and new ones coming in, we're never going to get that efficacy that we want. So we need to value them. We need to pay them their worth. And we need to raise the bar of the attitudes and opinions of teachers, because we're now living in a day and age where, you call home about a child's academics, behavior, social, whatever it is, and the parents aren't supportive. They don't support you. You're wrong. It wasn't their child. The conversation takes that negative tone, and we really are putting teachers in a hard place where they're not able to do their mandate. They're not able to educate children and keep their classrooms running efficiently when we don't have the support of parents, the public, the politicians, the various stakeholders in education. And we need their support to do our best work, and we need their funding.
How much do you think that the 4 years of teachers and specifically not, I'm going to retract my statement officially. How much do you think that the 4 years of specifically teacher unions, I'm going to clarify that, keeping kids out of school and forcing them to go to remote learning, thus opening up the educational practices, right? So parents now are actually getting a first person perspective. Look, I did learn something in history class, Mr. Timmerman, a first person historical perspective of what their kids were actually learning. And by the way, I mean, let's just call it for what it is. We see a lot of the social cultural issues now permeating into these government schools. So how much of those factors do you feel over the past 4 or 5 years have really impacted the perception that parents have towards the government schools, the public schools? And with that, I'm not saying teachers specifically, but the teacher unions. I mean, Randy Weingarten here in the States, she was advocating for school closures up until 2023. So we see that is something that it not only has continued to resonate here in the States, but there's a lot of animosity from parents and frankly, a lot of teachers too, who said, I don't want to not be able to teach in school. Like, I'm not a high risk person. Okay, let me go to school and teach. So how much do you think that maybe those play into the factors of people not really being as supportive as you would like, or maybe they have been in the past?
So that's a loaded question. There's a lot in there to unpack, but I would say that, I often get frustrated that teachers are grouped in with their teacher union leaders, because the teacher union leaders are there to ensure fairness. They're in there to be the balance and check of the government, of the politicians, of what's happening with funding and in schools. And they're necessary. And as teachers, we need them because, quite frankly, the politicians, governments, they would have swallowed teachers up by now if we didn't have them at the front line pushing back. However, teachers themselves cannot speak freely in the public. We can't be on TV answering a reporter's questions about how we feel about school closures or those sorts of things. We're represented by our union leaders. And union leaders and teachers themselves may see things differently. They're looking at the system as a whole, and we're looking at it from a very different lens or perspective. So we have to differentiate between union leaders and the teachers on the front line, number one. And then number two, I think that remote learning, it did a lot of things in education. It gave parents a window into classrooms and what a teacher, faces on a daily basis somewhat in a artificial environment. However, parents were also quick to judge teachers on the level of programming, which we had no warning. We didn't see this coming. We're not technology experts. We've never had to run online classes. And so there was a huge learning curve where every teacher was, every man for himself. Nobody was handing us the resources and the technology pieces and the online textbooks, whatever we needed to be successful. We were just making it up as we go along while learning to adjust to live in this new, COVID world. So was it an accurate reflection of our classrooms and our education system and what teachers do on a day-to-day basis? No. And so again, being judged on something very artificial that is not representative of what we do in our classrooms, where we had to shift on a moment's notice. But I also do think there are a handful of parents out there that can really say, wow, now that I see all this going on online and I see what you must be dealing with on a day-to-day basis when you've got these 30 different unique children in the classroom and they see the chaos that can be, some parents came out with a new appreciation. So it went both ways, right? I don't know. I think that if we don't support our teachers and help them do better, we're not going to fix this education system.
So I have 2 points I want to go back to really quick. So one of the things you mentioned is that teachers weren't prepared. And I agree with you. You guys were completely set up to fail. But when you go to the friends in the private sector, who, whether charter schools, private schools, and so forth, a lot of them were still able to make things work. They were not only able to make things work, they were also able to continue the in-person education. And I'm not going to go into a whole COVID debate, but a lot of it was based on the fact that the data presented itself saying, if you're young, you're a kid, or if you're a young adult, you're not at risk for COVID. Now, the older Americans, or not just Americans, the older folks in the world, or high-risk comorbidity folks, yeah, they were absolutely at risk. So in that kind of a context, we can make educated decisions based on the data presented, but I just feels like the government data and the government school was not allowing conversation, and a lot of it went back to what the teacher unions wanted. Now, let me very quickly share a screen, because I do want just one thing here, Shannon. I think we should focus on, because you mentioned as a solution funding these folks and getting more teacher dollars. And I think anybody listening right now, the audience says, yeah, teachers need to be able to be empowered. But you said we need to punish the politicians that they create the scenarios that we can't fix this stuff. Well, I want to just quickly show you something. And this is something that blew my mind. Ready? So here, let me open this up here. So this is from a website called Open Secrets. Open Secrets tracks funding across the board, specifically and usually like nonprofits or think tanks, or in this case, unions. And this was just so transparently shocking to me. When you look at now 2024, here's the data for 2024, but we're only in June, so it's not 100% yet. Let's look at 2022 and 2020 here. So just for folks playing along the home game who aren't watching the video version, let's look at this. So in 2022, $55.3 million were given in contributions to political parties by the teacher unions. In 2020, something big happened in 2020. What was that? Oh yeah, COVID. Something else happened. $66.5 million was given in donations and contributions to politicians. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's look at where that money actually went. Percentage to Democrats, 99.47% went to the Democratic Party in 2022 and 97.2% in 2020 to the Democratic Party. Republicans in 2020, 2.19%, and in 2022, 0.38. They couldn't even get a whole percent. So I look at that, and again, I'm not super good at math, but I was good at statistics. That speaks volumes, and it's not an outlier, because if you scroll down, let's go all the way down to 1990. Just here's the contributions for folks, again, from the Democratic Party, or rather to the Democratic Party from teachers unions. 94%, 96%, 98%, 97%, 96%, 94%. You're going to see a recurring theme. It's all 90+%. So I say all that, Shannon, you just look at the data, right? And you look at where we are today. And I look at the system we have in place, and it's a hard sell to me to say we just need to put more money into the system when the system is getting lots and lots of money. And it seems to kind of be working as it was designed by central planners who have a really good idea of what they want to see in terms of schooling or education, but they're the ones controlling the strings, versus if we were to go back to a free market system, it sounds like a lot of the solutions that you and I can agree on would be much more easily accessible, specifically sending the funding where it needs to go. Fund the students, not the systems. Fund the teachers, not the systems. Fund those folks, not the administrators. That's way easier for me to say, you know what? I can choose not to send my kid towards this schooling district that's embracing this backwards, well, we've always done things this way mentality. And I can say, you know what? There's a Montessori school across the road that I can go ahead and I can support with my dollars, because I know it's going to not just be better for the teachers and the students, but it's going to give them better outcomes. So I say all that. That's kind of my final thoughts for today. And I would love for you to paint the picture in terms of where I got things wrong. If I got things wrong, I know I'm sure you have some disagreements, but also let's talk about from a, I guess, common ground perspective. Is there anything that you heard today that was new and has maybe opened your mind to exploring different ways of funding government schools, or instead of having it go towards the government schools, instead follow the students, not the systems?
Okay, so I'm going to say that that last graph you just showed, again, I'll agree that you in America are a little bit crazy. You do things that are
We know that.
asinine, like that just doesn't happen in Canada, right? Like our teacher unions do not give loads of money like that to any government, and I do think there's even rules about them being able to give money to support a government. So we may throw our support and say we back this government, but we don't put our dollars there. So that's a little bit crazy when I see that graph. And I quite frankly didn't know that that was happening with the teacher unions in the United States. I do agree that we need reform. We need a different way of thinking about our education system. I often say, like, I just want to like close schools and throw out the whole education system and like get the best minds together to sit here and just redo this whole thing, because we just keep trying to fix small pieces of it or throw a band-aid on something, and it really just needs a whole redo. We need to do it over. We're not preparing the kids for the world that's to come, or even the world that we're living in. We know that research to practice takes 20 years, and that we just can't keep up with societal changes, with the new skills, demands, technologies that are happening in the world. So we really just need to have a whole look at this school system and go about it differently. And while I do see the value in having the money follow the kids and be with the parents, I just think that, you know, pushing that forward requires a lot of thought, because we will end up in the, you know, not the same situation, but we will end up with new problems, you know, if we were to follow that without doing that heavy thinking and heavy lifting about what that really needs to look like, and how, which ways that could go wrong, and put measures in place ahead of time to try to keep that from happening. Because there's not going to be a perfect system, but I know for sure there's got to be a better system than what we're doing in Canada and what you're doing in the United States right now.
Well, hey, I'm a sales guy by trade. And whenever I go into a company, one of the most dangerous phrases I ever hear is, "We've always done things this way."
Yes.
So at the very least, I would challenge you, Shannon, to maybe bring some of your educator friends together and really dig into the whole idea of school choice, because we're seeing some phenomenal outcomes from a state perspective here in the United States. And again, I keep on bringing up my buddy Corey DeAngelis. He's been on the show a few times. His title, I have aptly named him, is Corey DeAngelis, the school choice evangelist, because he is literally going around the country, state capital to state capital, talking to educators and talking to politicians, and basically redoing the entire way that the traditional, "we've always done things this way" schooling system has been done, particularly from the top-down government perspective. And it's having incredibly positive outcomes. And I think it is something that we should really start to consider more strongly, especially, you know, from I'd say a national perspective. But let's break down these borders. I want to go to the New Yorker and get the best Chinese food in Canada. No more borders. No, I'm just kidding. All my open border friends out there are saying, "Yeah, he's one of us now." No, not yet. But no, when we look at this topic, right, let's go into Canada. Let's start bringing these ideas, because we see them working in the little test cases, right? And by the way, that was kind of the whole idea of the United States, was each little state was supposed to be its own little laboratory of liberty to see, what can we do? What can you make work in this little state? And we're going back more to this federalist mentality in the United States, which I love to see, while still having a battle between the big overarching central planning approach from the federal government. But it is addressing some of these very, I would say, foundational issues that exist both in the United States and Canada. Now, there is one more graph. I know I have so many graphs, Shannon, but I did see this graph, and it was talking about the government school system and how it has become more of a jobs program than an educational program. Now, you don't have to necessarily agree with that, but just look again at the data here, right? We've seen from 2016 to 2017, we had 6.1 million employees in the United States staffing for schools. And then you look at, there was 47.4 million students. Where are we today? 46.4 million students, a decrease in 1 million students, and yet 6,400,000 teachers, an increase of 300,000 staff across the board, an increase of 300,000 employees. Now, again, I'm not good at math, but that ratio doesn't add up for me, especially when we go back to the funding graphs that we were showing before. So I think across the board, we can all agree it's broken. System be broken. Let's try to bring some solutions. That's what we're trying to do here in the school choice world, but that's what you're trying to do as well in helping empower teachers. And I love that you're trying to focus the attention on the money to where it actually impacts the most positive good, and that is directly towards the students and the teachers. So at the very least, and by the way, this isn't just for Shannon and I today, this is for anybody in the audience who is listening and they have their skeptical hat on saying, okay, Brian, this sounds a little crazy. Or heck, on the other side of the aisle, folks saying, come on, Shannon, this sounds a little crazy. At the very least, this is showing that, hey, we agree on the problem. Now let's start workshopping these solutions. So Shannon, that's my final thoughts for today. What do you have for us on your end? And of course, where can folks go ahead and buy your new book, New Teacher Confidential?
Yes, it's New Teacher Confidential, what they didn't tell you about being a teacher. And you can buy it wherever you get your books, but it's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the major book retailers. And it's really to try to help set new teachers up for success. So it's those things you don't learn in your formal teacher training that you can only learn through experience, trying to give you some shortcuts and hopefully help set you up for success as you embark on your education journey as a teacher.
Give us like a sneak peek to the book. What's one of the most like shocking things that somebody who picks up the book and reads it would be like, wow, I didn't know that.
Oh, I don't know. You know what? I think my favorite part of the book is talking about student behavior, because so much we hear student behavior is out of control, and it's really just a human connection piece. You know, we need to connect on a human level with these students that are struggling and find out what basic needs aren't being met before we can redirect that behavior and educate them. So I'm hoping to kind of reframe how we look at student behavior, and especially negative student behavior, and see if I can't help some new teachers figure some things out sooner rather than later that can help those friends that need us.
And by the way, I have a lot of friends who I would say are much more on Shannon's side of this conversation. They're government teachers, public school teachers. They've gone through the process, and they look at the system saying, yeah, it's broken as well. But again, this is a dialogue that I think we all need to keep having, and frankly, having more recesses. Well, you could have more recesses. That'd be fun too. I was thinking Reese's.
Kids would love that.
You know, peanut butter cups are good too. But anyways, yes, we need to have more of an appropriate dialogue, and having books like New Teacher Confidential, I think that's a great resource for any new teacher. So please, folks, if you got some value from today's conversation, you listen to Shannon, you say, wow, she's got it figured out when it comes to how do we help empower teachers to help empower our kids. Please go ahead, check out her brand new book, New Teacher Confidential. Link will be in the show notes. And of course, if you go ahead and purchase a copy, please reach out to Shannon and say, hey, I heard you on the Brian Nichols Show, and I really appreciated your dialogue. So otherwise, with that being said, folks, if you got some value from today's conversation beyond going out and purchasing said book, please go ahead and give today's episode a share. And when you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Where, Shannon, can folks go ahead and find you should they want to continue the conversation?
All the same places. So you can find me as Shannon Hazel on Twitter or Teacher EDU on Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome stuff. Links all in the show notes. And by the way, folks, this has been truly one of my favorite conversations. Did you notice something? Let's just microcosm this episode. Shannon and I were able to have some disagreements and not leave the conversation like we hate each other. We could have an appropriate dialogue, both bring some really good points to the table. And I think it leaves both of us leaving today's episode with a lot to think about. So this is how you have a productive dialogue. You don't go on to social media and you start like trying to flame each other. That's not how you build a community that's going to be productive. So this is what we really want to empower our audience here at the Brian Nichols Show to be able to do, is have these conversations that, yes, can be tough at times, but to do so in good faith. And with that, make sure that we're focusing on the outcomes, right? Not just the isms. Let's focus on the outcomes. What is going to lead to a positive solution across the board for all the parties that we have mentioned here today? So with that, please go ahead, support the show. Find us on your favorite podcast catcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your favorite video version of the show. You can find it on YouTube. You can find us over on Rumble. We have episodes going up in their entirety over on Twitter and on Facebook. So wherever it is you like to consume your podcast or video content, just please do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell, and of course, head down below into the comments. We want to hear what you have to say because yes, we actually do enjoy having some audience participation, but please keep it nice. And with that being said, one final plug, please support the folks who support us, our phenomenal sponsors like Cardio Miracle, our studio sponsor, Ebles CBD, The Wellness Company, and our good friends over at AMP America. Today's episode was not sponsored by the New Yorker in Canada, in Prescott, for the best Chinese food, but go check it out, because if you're up in the northern New York area, if you're up in the Canadian Ontario area, that's the place to go. I hope they're still open. I haven't been there in like 25 years, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Shannon Hazel, I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Any final thoughts for the audience as you wrap things up?
No, Brian, it was great to chat with you. You caught me off guard with your graphs there. I had no idea they were coming, so trying to digest those real quick. But yeah, it's always a good time. Thank you.
Absolutely. We had some fun. And folks, thank you for joining us. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show not from, Shannon Hazel from New Teacher Confidential. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.